this morning we'll be getting started with cloud. So we'll look at the different cloud models, which I expect a number of us may be familiar with. We'll look at it as related to Azure Regions, Zones, Resources, resource groups, security, subscriptions. Then we'll look at identity management within the Azure environment and relate it with some of the things we have learned when we're looking at the fundamentals and traditional systems. So if we still recollect from our week 3 up to from week 1 up to week 3, a lot of things we covered had to do with how things are done within a traditional system, where you would have like a server. You have a server that is made up of some hardware components, your storage, your processor, and the likes. You either use that server directly that way, or if you want to manage resources, you virtualize using hypervisors like, say, VMware, Hyper-V, and the likes. On top of it, you create virtual machines, where virtual machines can be unlimited, only limited by how much resources the physical host can take. And on top of it, you install your applications, your services, and the rest of them, like maybe you're installing TMS, Exchange, SharePoint. You have a web application that you want to publish, you do that. And each of these VMs have got their own individual components, like their standalone machines. They have compute, they have RAM, they have storage, they have network. And on top of this layer, you offer services, either print services, DNS services, application services, identity services, document management services, email services, which your users now consume. Now, if you break this down into different layers, just like it is structured on these particular charts, it's either you manage them completely, you manage the whole stack completely, or you have a situation where someone else can take responsibility for each of these stacks and you do the rest. And that is where the idea of cloud computing comes in. Over time, resources, infrastructures get more powerful, and sometimes they are being underutilized. So if I buy, for instance, if you see your PC could possibly say maybe a Core i3 or probably a Core i5, and all you do on it is, let's say you do Word, you do Excel, you send email, underutilizing that powerful compute, basically. So, but at that layer, yeah, you could do some resource sharing if you go and get, say, Hyper-V installed on it, or say maybe a VMware workstation installed on it. You could use it for so many other stuff, but still, you are the only one using it. Then moreover, the spend for that particular computer system had already been incurred. So if you bought the computer system for 1 million, you had already incurred that 1 million spend. So even though your use in terms of cost may be less than, say, 10% of it. So the idea of cloud computing comes in, where you have aggregated infrastructure. You have aggregated infrastructure that you can begin to sell and build users as they use. So when you bring several servers together, naturally a server that one person would have bought and underutilized, the service provider buys it and share it across several tenants or probably users, and they pay based on their use. And the provider now takes off certain administrative challenges. For instance, if I have a laptop, if the disk goes bad, I have to go and replace it. If there's a Windows OS patch, I have to apply it. I need to download something about connect to the internet, I have to pay for the service, internet service provider. Power, electricity. I have to pay for it. All this stuff I have to pay for them out of my pocket, even though I may be utilized. For instance, your laptop may be connected to power. Now that you are not using it, and you are paying for the power. Or probably maybe cooling. Because that's why the fact that it's a laptop, you still need to cool it off, else it will overheat and just go bad. So maybe you have a fan, or probably say maybe an AC. You pay for the electricity that is also consuming, even though it's still being underutilized. So when you aggregate this all together and a provider takes responsibility for it and begin to sell to you, then you only pay based on consumption. So you have this computing model based on only what you consume. And that is where cloud computing comes in. So simply put, it is just that same IT infrastructure on someone else's data center, with someone else taking responsibility for a certain part of the management of it. So there's no, although there's a cloud in the sky, but if you go into the sky, you won't see any computer system there. So instead, it is someone else's own computer system. So me being at home here in my small cubicle, I could set up a cloud. All I just need to do is to put up powerful computer systems and begin to look for an application stack that manages resources on that particular computer system. And I begin to sell it as cloud. Then I name it maybe Raj's Cloud. And I begin to compete with the likes of Azure, AWS, and the likes. It's as simple as that. So, moving on. Okay. Yep. So now, I talked about someone else being responsible for certain parts of the management of the infrastructure when it's in the cloud. So that brings us to the shared responsibility model, which is something very common that at another point in time, you would have seen it, or probably you might have heard of it, that there are different IT infrastructure management model, including the legacy or perhaps traditional and the cloud. And across each of those models, you have different level of responsibility. Starting with the traditional, which is on-premise. If that is your model, then you are responsible for everything. I'm responsible for buying my servers. I'm responsible for paying for the space. Either I create an office space, or probably I go and rent one space, or probably I go to a data center where they have co-location service. I pay for it. I pay for my power. I pay for my electricity. I pay for my cooling. I pay for my management. I have to pay an administrator that would manage it. I have to pay a security administrator that would manage it. I have to pay for my switches, my Cisco routers and switches. I have to pay for my internet connectivity, my WAN connectivity where required. Pay for an hypervisor that will run on that particular physical machine. License the operating system if it's Windows. I'll probably pay for support if it's Linux. If I don't require support, I have to just manage myself. Third-party applications, libraries, dependencies, I have to manage them myself. The application, I have to manage that. I get a developer, develop an application for me, or probably I buy an off-the-shelf application, which I will pay for. I buy Exchange, I pay for it. I buy SharePoint, I pay for it. Name any application, you pay for it. You manage who access and what's it called, how they access that. So you are responsible for everything. A large number of times, if you are your cost, the variability of IT spend or probably cost is not that flexible. So which means if you are a firm of, let's say, less than 20 users, and you require as much infrastructure as someone that has 1,000 users, the flexibility of your spend, putting consideration number of users, may not be that much. So which means what the user will spend 1,000 will spend may also be the same thing, or probably be just averaging little small. So that variable cost factor in your spend is not that much. So because you pay for the same thing, you pay at the same rate. The rate they sell a laptop, if you are buying 20, might not be less than the rate they sell if you are buying 100. The rate you pay for internet batteries if you require 1 gig uplink and downlink It's the same thing. An organization that's 1,000 users will also pay for it. The rate I'll buy RAM will be the same rate at which you also buy RAM. So which means the availability is not that much as such. But when you begin to switch into a model that makes certain factor variable, then you begin to enjoy that particular model. So your on-premise, you are responsible for everything. Then when you go within the cloud, and like I said, within the cloud is you giving you having a provider coming to provide those services for you and be responsible for certain parts of management along the stack. Then you have that cloud model where it now starts. The model now depends on how much responsibility you take and how much responsibility the provider takes. So the first model is what you refer to as infrastructure as a service, where at this level, you still deal with infrastructure. And when we say infrastructure, we are talking about the underlying components that makes your service available. So sometimes I would use the word service, I'll use the word application, but they may be, what's it called? They will be different. So let me give, for instance, if I say email service, I'm talking about the service itself, in the sense that the ability for me to send and receive email and do any other thing that I need to do around email, maybe meeting invites, calendars, and all those stuff. That's the service. But the email application has a lot more than the service, because there may be a lot of applications that are responsible for that particular service. I have my Exchange, what's it called? My Exchange application. I would have my storage on which I would have my database on it. I would have the physical, okay, at the application level, I would have Exchange application itself. Then Exchange application will run on an OS. You have a lot of dependencies like your .NET library, your communication libraries, and stuff like that. So that is the application. The application has a lot more than with the service. So, but primarily, here I'm talking about someone responsible for the underlying infrastructure, where it is still physical. It hasn't even gotten to the application layer. So at this particular point, you are talking about primarily, say, maybe storage. You are talking about storage. You are talking about networks. You are talking about compute. Compute here, you refer to as CPU plus your RAM. That's what gives you compute. So at this particular layer, you have someone responsible for these three. And how is that possible? It's possible if the person has a physical server, which they have bought. On that particular physical server, they have an hypervisor running on it, or other virtualization engine. For instance, when you say hypervisor, you are talking about a software-defined compute that allows you to be able to create a VM. Then you now have other technology that allows you virtualize other compute services, like software-defined network, or probably software-defined storage. For instance, vSAN on VMware allows you to create a software-defined storage. Then you have storage pool within Windows X, the Windows Server 2012, 2016 also allows you to create software-defined storage. Then you also have technologies that allow you to create a software-defined network, like it comes with the hypervisor. We are able to create virtual networks. So they sell all this for you in virtualized form. That is infrastructure. So that when I need a server today, I'm told that, oh, we have an application that needs to come up within 20 minutes now. I don't have to go to a Tigba to say, please, do you have a Dell PowerEdge 720 with so capacity I need? Even when you look at the delivery time, the availability of that server infrastructure, you wouldn't meet with the requirement, what's it called, deadline. So in this case, referred to as a software infrastructure as a service. The service provider gives you what you refer to as your infrastructure that allows you to do the rest. So the output here is now the virtual machine. Top the virtual machine, I'm responsible for the OS that runs on it. I'm responsible for whatever I want to use the server for. I'm responsible for the application I install on it. I'm responsible for how I manage access to that application. That is infrastructure as a service. When the service provider takes up more responsibility, up to the point where they provide you a platform where all you need to come with is just your application. You are coming in with just your application. A very good example is if I need to host a website today. Maybe someone created a PHP website for me. Then I go to www.google-host and I buy a Linux hosting platform, say maybe $10 per month. What is that Linux hosting platform giving me? It's giving me all the networks. It's giving me the virtual machine. It's giving me the OS, which I won't see because I'm not responsible for it. I don't see the virtual machine. I'm not responsible for it. I don't see the computer network, the storage. I'm not responsible for it. It gives me the runtime. What is the runtime there? Apache. I would have Apache, which is my web server within the Linux platform, if that is what I use. I would have PHP. I would have my SQL. Everything that makes up the hosting requirement for a PHP application, it gives me and it manages them. So all I am coming with is my code to put on top of it, and I manage the rest. That is platform as a service. Then lastly, you have software.
I just want to ask a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my question is, if you look at the networking part of this,
yes.
What are the things that someone needs to pay attention to? Because I know you have to define how you want your network to look at as well. What are the things that from the user that needs to be done aside from the cloud provider mandates that the cloud provider does? Do we have to make sure, okay, certain IPs must be used, or it's just whatever they provide that we use?
Okay, so we would come to that, which we would also treat extensively. And that was the reason why we covered that CIDR subnetting part when we're talking about the fundamentals. But just to do a quick response to your question, the only point where you begin to have headache over what will be my network layout in the cloud is when you are doing infrastructure as a service. Okay. Because despite the fact that the service provider is responsible for this bit, their responsibility provides you with the networking stack. But at the point where you are creating your virtual machines and you want them to communicate, you have to understand what will be your network layout that runs on their own network stack, their own Cisco switch or whatever it is that they work with, which you wouldn't see and you won't be able to control. But to a large extent, they offer you that variability, that flexibility to be able to define what type of network resources or probably what type of IP component, networking component, and how you define it within the limits of what they make available. So when I say within the limit of what they make available, they can define that, okay, we support a 10.10. Maybe /16. And the maximum you can create is, let's say, 100. That's just giving an instance. So which means if they are giving you a boundary, all of your virtual machine can really be created within that particular scope. And the way it may be on service provider A may be different from the way it may be in service provider B. For instance, within traditional system, when you have a network subnet, let's say 192.168, we are coming back to subnetting, let's say 10.0/24. When we say /24, we always say within that range, you have 2 IP addresses that are not usable, right?
Yes.
Which is the host and which one?
Broadcast.
The host ID and the broadcast. But this same IP address, if you are using it in Azure, it is 5 IP addresses that you have to reserve that you can't use. So, which means they provide you the network layer, the whole Cisco suite, but they have given you a boundary of what you can do within their own infrastructure. So they are telling you, yeah, you can come with your Class C IP address, but if you come with your Class C IP address, we are taking 5 out of it. So that is how much control they have and how much control you have. But we'll come back to this more extensively.
Okay, sir.
So The last bit here is software as a service. And within software as a service, here, they manage and take responsibility for everything, including the application. Mind you, earlier I was giving instances of where you could use the word application and service. Your application gives you the service. It's just like your Exchange gives you the email service. Exchange plus several other companies gives you email service. But in this particular case, when you say software as a service, they even take responsibility for the software itself. That means they design, they update, they modify, they configure the software itself. It is their responsibility, they patch it. All you do is just consume the service. And a very good example is, let's say, Exchange Online, where you do is just go set up your domain and begin to send and receive email. Gmail, you just go set up an email, a domain, and begin to send and receive email. You don't care about if they are running Exchange 2010, 2016, or probably 2019. You don't care if the OS on which they are running it is 2012 or probably 2019 or probably 2022. You don't care what .NET library pack they have installed and stuff like that. All you care about is just go there, send your email, and receive email. So that is what the shared responsibility model is. So what's important of this model? The importance of this model helps you decide to know where your responsibility lies when it comes to using cloud services, and also what are those things that are possible or what are those things that are not possible. For instance, when it comes to, say, hosting, here, let's assume I have a Windows application to host now, and I go to a hosting provider. They give me a Windows host platform. It's a platform. I don't see the OS, so they can't allow me log into the OS. I don't see the virtual machine. They can't allow me install a manage a virtual machine. I can't come and say I want to install an additional application on the host. It's not possible. The only thing you are allowed to do is come with your application and place your application on it. They now give you an interface through which you interact with this stack, but not the raw interface. Like you won't be seeing the Windows server. If you want to see Windows Server, manage it yourself, you come here, you use infrastructure as a service, where what they will give you is ability for you to create a VM and even decide what OS installs on it and decide what you. So here I can say, okay, I have a Windows Server, I want to install 10 applications on it. They don't care. But at this point, you don't have that control at that layer. And at this point, you don't even have control to say, for instance, you say you want to use email service on within the Microsoft Cloud Stack, and say the email application you want is Exchange 23, or probably you want a postfix email application, which is an email, just an Exchange equivalent that you have within the Linux environment. So that's the way this works. So we've seen this, and some of the responsibility within the infrastructure as a service. What you could be getting is you could be getting a VM to use, you could be getting storage to use, virtual networks, you can create them and use them, and you're able to manage them. At this point where you have a platform as a service, they offer you the operating system and also the underlying platform that would allow you to do your own application and make it available. Basically, maybe web hosting or the likes, or probably serverless. For instance, these days you now have serverless infrastructure where you come with your code. Just come with your code. They give you the platform. You don't even see how the code runs. It just runs and gives you results. Then at this point, where you have hosted applications, you have the likes of say Gmail, you have the likes of M365, let's say OneDrive, and the rest of them are like that. So now, what are the benefits of cloud? This, I believe a lot of us will be familiar, highly available in the sense that they spend more time to ensure that their services are available, so that I don't pay for a service and tomorrow they tell me. It's just like here where we pay, where you pay for NEPA and you don't get light. NEPA is more or less like a cloud service provider, because, and in that particular case, I could term it under software as a service, because how they generate the whole power, how they distribute it is none of my business. All I'm concerned with is I get power. But in the case where I go and buy generator myself, and I'm doing infrastructure as a service, because I'll buy fuel, I'll service it, I'll buy oil, I'll be responsible. But I can't guarantee the availability of my generator, because when it goes down, I don't have a spare generator. But it is expected that if I'm using a cloud service, since what I'm paying for is a service, then there should be a standard SLA that would ensure the availability. So a lot of providers, you see them give you something like 99.9, 99.999, 99.99999, just to tell you that to a large extent, their services are available, they are reliable, scalable. I can increase my use at any point in time. Today, I can say I want just one Microsoft 365 license, and tomorrow I say I want 10. Today, I can say I want a virtual machine that is 10 gig and 10 gig RAM with, let's say, 4 CPU core. And I can wake up tomorrow to say I want it doubled. But you can imagine if it is within the traditional environment and you say you want it double, it means that you have to go to the market and begin to look for those hardware components. And that would even depend on if your current chassis, your server chassis, can even support that. So there are a lot of challenges. Your cost is predictable. I can say I want to spend $10, it's going to be $10. But if you even budget for your server, let's even come back to using instance of you providing a generator. Let's assume you budget 2,000 naira to spend on a generator in a month. It's not guaranteed that you spend that 2,000 naira. Something can go wrong. A plug you never bargained for could go off. With this rain falling this time, you could have water splash getting into the engine and it's faulty and stuff like that. Then security, because they are now custodian of your services and infrastructure, they have to make it more secure. And a large number of time, they are spent on security, and even research and depth of security is going to be way more better than what you can offer. And they have a lot of features that allows you to do proper management, which can be tied also to governance. These are basic benefits of cloud, which you can read more to really understand. And a large number of times, these benefits would always serve as a justification for why maybe you should go cloud or probably you should remain on-prem. So now, using Azure as an instance, we said basically the idea here is that you have a service provider putting all the whole hardware infrastructure together somewhere, probably maybe in a data center, and they now begin to sell the service to you in chunks. Now, talk about data center. One of the components for the presence of Azure within that particular context is what we refer to as region. A region is actually an area where you have several of Microsoft data centers. And within the context of how you design or probably how you supply to service, it's an important factor that you need to consider. So regions are made up of one or more data centers in close proximity. So let's assume you have the South Africa region. Within South Africa region, you could have minimum of 1, it could be 2, it could be 3 data centers in different locations within that particular region. And you can see they are very close, such that connectivity between them, the latency of connectivity between them is low. When we say latency is low, it means that connectivity between them is of high speed. And they also have they also provide the option of you having to design some kind of redundancy. So when we say redundancy, in order to provide that concept of high availability, when you are designing, they would always advise you to say, okay, if you set up a VM, make it scale across 2 different regions. Why are they saying that? So that if region 1 goes down, your service is still available from region 2. So you have multiple, probably several of those regions. Then it also preserves, you can also use it as a concept for preserving data residency. That is, if you are in a country where there's a regulation that says that you shouldn't store your data within a particular region. So I could say, okay, I want to limit the storage of my data within Africa. So I have to look for regions or private data centers within Africa to store my infrastructure. Or maybe there's a restriction to say you keep it within Europe or probably within the America region. You can always do that. I don't know if there are such regulations within Nigeria that restricts where you can store data, but it can possibly be with the banks. There might be restrictions to say, okay, now no customer data should be stored within China. But there are regions within China. So which means if you have an administrator within a bank working there, they don't go and spin up an instance in China and begin to use it to process customers' data. So presently, Microsoft has got over 60 regions that are spread across 140 countries. And this map gives an idea of where each of those regions are. And within Africa, you have about 2, which are both in South Africa. So within regions, you'd have what referred to as availability zone. The idea behind availability zone, so let me put this in context. I have a region, let's assume the South Africa region, where I say we could have 1 or more data centers. Now, each of these data centers are now grouped into availability zones. If I have more than 1, or let's say maybe 3, so I have 3, and each of them can be an availability zone on their own. I have one availability zone here, I have one availability zone here, where an availability zone is where you have a data center with independent power, cooling, and networking. Independent power, independent cooling, and independent networking. So which means if I have availability zone 1 here, the power, the cooling, and the network stack of this availability zone is totally independent from this. Why is that? It is further to provide that level of redundancy and high availability. So if I have services within this availability zone, if this availability zone goes down, it doesn't affect my services in this other availability zone. And these guys are also connected through very fast fiber optic network, and they provide the protection against downtime due to data center failure. So within even though we don't have such, let's take for instance, let's say Nigeria, you have main 1 that offers data center services. You have main 1 or main data that offers data center services. You have MTN, they offer data center services. Then you also have rack center, they offer data center services. Now, the whole of Lagos may not be large enough for you to refer to as a region, but let's take, within the context of this example, let's assume it's a region. Now, if you've been to main 1's data center, they have different stacks of data center, even though each of those data centers they use these containers to build their data center, and each of them are separate data center with separate cooling. So if something goes wrong with this guy, this box here, it doesn't affect that here. So in this context, you could call this guy one availability zone and this one availability zone. And the same thing if you go to MTN. Not been to that of MTN, but I believe that the same way it would be. Rack center, the same thing. They use container boxes for their data centers, and they have several of them, where each of those boxes have got different cooling, they have got different power alike. So if this guy goes down, it doesn't affect this. So the whole of this Lagos state, where you have these 3 of them, can be referred to as a region. Why each of these are referred to as an availability zone. And the speed between each of those availability zones is so very high that you can't ever think that maybe they belong to different networks, because the highest level of speed you could have is on a LAN, a local area network. Now, you also have this concept of region peers. What is the importance of region peers? Region peers is what Microsoft on its own, still again, used to offer redundancy and availability. How? If I have a region, let's say in North Central US, and I say the peer for North Central US is South Central US, what it means is that for every data or resource that is available here, there's a direct synchronization here, and also a direct synchronization here. And what does that mean? If this Central US goes down and you have customers there, within that downtime, the first thing they want to do is switch them automatically to the North Central US, so that you don't experience, they don't, what's it called? They don't go down on their commitment to you that they promise you 9.9 or probably 99.99%. There will be that automatic switch. And the same thing applies that way. That is on Microsoft's side. They use it to manage their own service. But for you also as a user, it also makes sense that when you are creating services, create them in peers, although there's a cost implication to it. So what does that mean? If I create a virtual machine now as infrastructure as a service, primarily they would advise you create them as a skill set. We'll still talk about the skill set. But simply put, the skill set is just where you have a minimum of a pair of virtual machines that could act as one. So if I create a skill set of 2 virtual machines, one can be in North Central US, while the other would be in South Central US. So if something goes down, if there's a disaster that would affect North Central US would actually be a geographic disaster like a tsunami, not maybe NEPA take light or stuff like that, would be a tsunami or probably an earthquake that brings down, because within North Central US, which is region, we have more than one data center. So anything that will eat the whole of North Central US and will affect the whole of the availability zones there, it's possible. Not like it's not possible. It's possible, although it might be minimal. But it's possible. But in case where it happens, you don't want it to still affect your service. So you create your service in peers. Put one in what is the primary region and put one what is the peer region. It's not as if I can't do one in North Central and one in West Europe. It is possible. But when you are creating an ability set, or probably in cases where you need to create services in peer, Microsoft would present you with recommended regions. And the top on top of that recommended region would always be the twin peer for the region you have selected as a primary region. But you can choose to go and do another one. But what would be the implication of doing another one? Let's assume I create a VM in North Central, and from the skill set, it has been recommended that I select South Central as the secondary region for my skill set. I can say no, I want West Europe. It's fine. But you have to consider what is the latency between North Central and West Europe. Regions that appear in peer, the latency between them will be minimal compared to regions that are not direct peers to each other. So the latency between North Europe and West Europe will be minimal compared to North US Central and West US Central. And we'll also see see that as well. There's a chart that gives you an idea of what is the latency of each of the data center locations from you. Let's say, for instance, we don't have a data center here in Nigeria. If I put up a VM in the South Africa region, and I put up a VM in, let's say, the West US region, the latency speed of connectivity to the VM in South Africa would be faster than to the VM in East Europe. And if you don't use South Africa, the next available region that is still closer to Africa is actually West Europe. So I'd rather go and use West Europe. So that's the idea behind the region peers. Then you have some other regions that are restricted and are not available for public use. Like you have regions that are specifically created for the US government. You have regions that are specifically created for the Chinese government. And for you to be able to set up and use resources within this region, you must have gotten an authorization. So they are not available for public use. And what's the idea behind some of these government regions? Each of those governments would have said, okay, for us to use you as a service provider, these are the minimum level of compliance. You have to comply with so many other stuff, several requirements. If you're able to comply with some of those requirements, then we'll be able to use it. So then Azure would now go ahead to say, okay, now let's set up a region that meets up with each of these compliance requirements. It could be management compliance, it could be security compliance. There could be a lot of them like that. And that would now strictly be for the Chinese government, probably US government or the Nigerian government if they choose to do the same. So just putting this in context, we said you have availability zones, or starting with a region. A region is a geographical location, and within that geographical location, you have several data centers, which are availability zones. And each of those availability zones would have one or more data centers. It could be one, it could be more. Each of them would have one or more. But you can see, just like the instance of, say, a main one or probably MTN, this could be the data center location of MTN, where I have each of these boxes, each of these container boxes that they use as their data center. I could have 3 or 4, and each of the collectively they make up an availability zone, where each of those 4 boxes are separate data centers on their own. They have different source of power, different source of cooling, different networks, so that if one box goes down, it doesn't affect the other box. Then you'd have outside this region, you would have several other regions. And when you are setting up instances for availability, you want to guide against any disaster that may affect a region, then you use the peer region. So if this is West Europe, this could be East Europe. So each of them are peers to one another, and they have very fast network connectivity. Although you could still use several other regions, but it is just advisable that you use that. Now, let's okay, maybe when we come back to, so when you go to this URL.
Hello, Raj.
Yeah, hi.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I just want to ask if there's any cost implication to using different availability zones.
If there's any what?
Cost implication.
To doing what?
To using different availability zones.
No, there are cost implications. So in so many instances, the prices per region may be different. A VM may cost, let's say, $1.02 per hour, just for instance, in East US or US East zone. That same VM may cost $1.5 in West Europe, and that same VM may cost 1.7 in the South Africa region. So, but the reasons for that cost variation may be different, because naturally the local services used in powering up each of those data centers may be different. The amount you pay for power in South Africa is different from the amount you pay for in US. The amount you pay for internet bandwidth and stuff like that. So every component that is required to offer that particular service, the cost to the provider differs. So that may also be an impact to how much they offer those services across different regions. So there will be cost implication. Then also, you also look at the proximity of each of those regions, especially when you are creating services in peers. The proximity of each of those regions. We have said some regions are more closer together, and they've been termed as peered regions. So which means, because when you are using services, a large number of times, the cost of your service is more than just the face value of that service. Let's take, for instance, I set up a VM, and the VM is costing me $1.7. That $1.7 may not be the only cost I'm paying for. As I transfer data into or out of the VM, I'll pay for that particular data. As I write chunks of data on the storage on that particular VM, I might be paying. So each of those underlying components that would collectively make your service available are what you put the cost implication in. So, and that would also be a factor into you deciding on how you architect your solution, like what service should I use, which region should I put it, then also what will be the availability services to me myself, or probably to me the consumer. For instance, if I choose to go and put up a VM in, let's say, US East region, yeah, I may pay more, I may pay less, rather $1.2, but the speed to me can be slow because I'm here in Nigeria. Then if I go and put that same VM up in South Africa, I may pay $1.7, but the speed will be much faster. So I put that into consideration as well. I hope that answers your question. Hello?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. So you could put up this URL on your browser, and this gives you an idea of the whole Microsoft infrastructure ecosystem. Offers you a 3D view into what their data center looks like, what it takes for them to power up the data center, how that data center is represented, up to the point where you could see a 3D view of what their Blade server looks like, and the different types of Blade servers that they use to offer different services. But just have it at the back of your mind that their data center is just like every other data center you may have been to, except for the fact that they have been properly engineered and set up to provide services at scale, other than what you may have within your environment that is just fit for purpose. So, having understood the core components of Azure Data Center, now going to the important part of it. What do you do within that environment? You create resources. Resources are those services that you can consume off the cloud environment. You could have virtual machines. You could create storage through storage accounts. You could create virtual networks. You create app services, database functions. There are several services that are available, and they keep increasing every day across all service providers, both AWS and what's it called, Azure, because as they begin to see the need or probably new concepts that can be implemented within the cloud environment, they put them up as services which you can always consume. And when you are creating your services, as a way of managing your services, you could group them together in what you refer to as resource group. So you create resources and you group resources together in what you refer to as a resource group, and it's just a container. And a resource can only exist in only one resource group. And one of the things you could use resource groups to do is you could use it to manage access. You could use it to manage access. You could use it to delegate responsibility. You could also use it to manage cost, so that all the resources I have within a particular resource group, I can see what they are costing me. I can restrict access to all those resources, because any access control you do at the resource group level applies to individual resources that you have under them. We'll see how that works briefly. Then after resource groups, you have what you refer to as subscription. Naturally, your subscription is your scope for billing. You don't just go and use those resources. You have to pay for them. And that payment is tied to a particular object that it calls subscription. So it's a boundary for billing. It is also a boundary for access control. Mind you, your resource group is also a boundary for access control. So which means you could have an hierarchy where you have subscription. Within subscription, you have resource group. Within resource group, you have resources. If I define an access control at the subscription level, every resource groups under that subscription inherits it, and every resources under that resource group also inherits the same level of permission. And you could have more than one subscription. One-on-one subscription within a tenant. A tenant is that's your your Azure account, and your Azure account is by default always tied to one identity management system an instance, even though you could create more than one identity management system. Your identity management system there is referring to Azure AD. So you have different subscription. How you manage, or probably how you intend to, your model for managed subscription may differ. You could tie it to function, you could tie it to cost center, you could tie it to business unit. I could say the finance guy, I have one subscription for them. So every services I use within Azure that is being used for the finance function entirely will be tied to one subscription. Then I have it that way. I could also have it per, let's say, maybe responsibility or probably project. I have project one. I want to aggregate the whole of the billing for that particular project to one subscription. So I could have it that way. There's no limit to how you can manage, or probably model for managing your subscription. And under your subscription, every other thing comes in. Then you have what referred to as management groups as well. On top of subscription is management group. Where management groups, you could use management group for governance purposes, which is also restriction, policies, and access. For instance, if I want, I want to restrict what are those Azure services that I want a particular unit to be able to use within Azure, or I want to put a limit to their spend within Azure, or I want to limit which region they can deploy services to, then I can create a management group, tie their subscription to that particular management group, then it applies. So if I say you should be able to create only resources within the South Africa region, if you're under that management group, you can't create because it's a policy. It will deny you to be able to put up resources in every other region. If I want to say the maximum limit of network that VMs you can create is 10, then once it hits 10, you can't do beyond what's it called, that. So a management group can be a tree that support up to 6 levels. So you could have them in a hierarchy where one management group inherits the other, and the effective effect of the management group will always be the one that is closer to the resource. So let's look at where I believe everybody can do this, but because we've done it before in the past, let me put this up and see how this works and just walk us through some of those things we have discussed. A few seconds. But while I'm bringing this up, any question? We have questions so far. So can you see my screen now? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So to start with, we all have a subscription. I believe we would have created one. So if I come here to say,
can you log into Azure with Yahoo account, or is it a subscribed version?
To your Yahoo account, okay, this one that you see here.
Yes.
So naturally, you know the minimum you require to create an Azure subscription, probably tenant. It's just an email address. You have to put your email address there. Yeah, so it could be Yahoo, it could be Gmail, it could be any.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So if I come here, I can see my subscription. This is currently my subscription, which is active. By default, to include a subscription, it comes with a root management group. So which means all my policy to restrict how much I consume, or probably what type of resources I create within this particular resource, can be tied to this particular management group. And it's, my account currently has an admin role, and my current cost within particular management group is this. So what else can I see here? I can see my billing, I can see my invoices, I can see whatever payment method I may have identified when creating this particular subscription. Then also, if I'm paying or probably consume Azure through a partner where you have a third level cloud service provider or private cloud service partners, CSP, they are called CSP, where those CSP are the one reselling Microsoft services to me, then I could have it here. So what that means is that instead of me paying Microsoft directly, I pay to the CSP and they pay to Microsoft. I can see my cost analysis here. Then if I come back here to, let me start here, services, I can see all services here, where each of these services are container for different resources that I can consume. All these guys are resources: identity, integration, compute. These are resources that I can create. These are compute resources, these are networking resources, storage. So you have them grouped under different categories, and they are referred to as the services: security, DevOps, migration, monitor, Intune, cloud hybrid. These are resources. And for me to be able to use Azure earlier, like I said, I would have to have a subscription. If I have a subscription, I could create a resource group. And if I come to resource group, yeah, I have it here. So I currently have 2 resource groups here. When creating resources, you can either create a resource group. After creating a resource group, then you go ahead and create your resources. But even when you don't do that, at the point of creating a resource, it would always ask you, do you want to add it to an existing resource group, or probably you want to create a new resource? And if you say you want to create a new resource group, it automatically creates a new resource group for you as part of the creation of that particular resource. And when you come here, you can see these are regions, different regions: UK, West, Europe. And here it says choose the region that is right for your customer. So what you would be doing, it says choose the location for broad set of Azure products and long-term capacity growth. These guys are arranged by virtue of their popularity, their use, basically, and also the cheap availability of services and also the cost of services. Mind you, not all resources are available in all regions. So I could set up a VM here that is only available in East US. If I want to create the same VM in, say, maybe South Africa, it will tell me that this particular VM is not available. So all regions don't contain the same type of services. That simply put, that's what that means. You have some services that are available in region A, not available in region B, and the likes. So if I come here to create resource group, I could call this test RG. And sometimes this guy would always tell you, give you information as regard each of those types of components you want to create. It says the collection of resources that share the same lifecycle, permissions, and policy. And that's one part, that lifecycle also. A large number of time, in order to manage how you consume, or probably your payment or cost implication, when you are creating temporary services within Azure, you want to delete them at the end of the day. And if I go ahead now to say I create a VM using that for an instance, it is not just creating a VM for me. It's creating VM, it's creating storage, it's creating network security group, it's creating a network for me. Say maybe at least 5 or 6 components. But what I actually initiated to create is just one component, which will be available for me to see. Now, when it's time for me to delete that, if I go and delete that VM alone, then a large number, it has happened that people will come to say, oh, I deleted the stuff now, but when I came back, the stuff was still charging me. Yeah, it was still charging you because the underlying components that were created for you as part of the creation of the VM were not deleted. Because you deleting the VM does not automatically delete them. So the point at which you could use to now manage the life cycle of each of those components is at the resource group. If they all belong to the same resource group, if you go ahead and delete that resource group, every other thing that was created as part of it, even though you know it or you don't know it, gets deleted. That's the bit of using resource group to manage the life cycle of a component. So I'll call this test resource group. I'll go ahead to say I create this guy. After creating your resource group, which I have here, test resource group, and if I come to resources, where are they here? Okay, yeah, it's meant to list them here. So I don't have any resources here under this. But I can come here to say create a resource. And this was the category we saw earlier. So let's assume my resource here is still coming here. Let me use that virtual machine as that instance. I want to create a virtual machine for maybe a new application that I need to set up. So it's going to automatically, because I have just one subscription, it's going to automatically select that. But if I have more than one subscription, like I said, I said you could have different subscriptions for different purposes. So let's assume that I have set up my subscription model to be based on the department. The finance department, I just told you that you need a VM to install one application that they use for audit or whatever purpose. So at that point in time, I have to come here and identify which of the subscription is for the finance department. This is using the resource group I created, but I can change that. I remember I also said, even if you don't create a resource group before you go and create a resource, it will allow you to create one on the fly. Then I'll give this guy a name. Let me call this test server 01. So you have to select a region. Have them recommended this way. But like I said, you may want to factor in a lot. And let me come here. Let's see if I, there's this portal where you can see, okay, Azure Region latency test. So yeah, Azure speed, where you can see what is the speed of connectivity from your present location to a particular region. So I'm presently in Nigeria here. If I put something somewhere, what would be the speed? So here I have, it's asking me to say this tool runs latency instance from your IP location to the data center around the world. It would know I'm in Nigeria because my public IP address would have flagged that I'm in Nigeria. And it says for latency test between Azure regions through backbone, you need to use a different, and what this latency test means through backbone means what is the speed between two different regions? Because at that particular level, the speed, if I have a VM in on Azure that is in South Africa, and I have a VM on Azure that is in US, when they communicate, they use the underlying network infrastructure of Azure to communicate. They don't actually communicate through the internet, but that primarily still depends on how you design a network. You could have also designed it that they connect through the internet, but if they are connecting through the underlying Azure infrastructure, the speed will be much different and even will be much different and even be better off. So I want to test to, let's say, South Africa here, Africa. First of all, West Europe, then South Africa. You can see currently, West Europe, I have 147 milliseconds. While South Africa, Johannesburg, I have 133. Let me come here and do one of the regions where you have the cheapest, where you have cheaper, let me don't say cheapest, where you have cheaper resources, price for resources is East US and East US 2. Prices of resources there may be cheaper, but look at your connectivity there. So if I'm in Nigeria here and I put up a service in East US, yeah, the price will be cheaper, like we'll see when we want to pick up a VM now. You can see I have 222 milliseconds. If I go to West Europe, I have 161. If I go to South Africa, I have 127. So it's either I pay more or I enjoy better speed, simply put. So coming here, this VM, this will be to Gen 2.
Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry. Sorry to interrupt. I have a question concerning the previous page we looked at,
Okay.
the cost. So if
Yeah.
I'm using, let's say, West Europe, can I at any time just go back in and change the region?
Yes, you can,
Okay.
but not all services support you changing the region. Not all services support you changing region. Some services allows you change region. Some services only support migration. Some services would require you to have to go and recreate a new one in that destination region.
Okay. Fair. Thank you.
Yeah. So if I come here, looking at pricing now, this is a standard D4S V3 and vCPU with 16 gig RAM Ubuntu server. This will cost me $140.16 per month in East US2. Let me come to, let's say, North Europe. You can see in North Europe, it will cost me 152. It's the same VMO, it will cost me 156. If I come to, where is West Europe? In West Europe, it is even more, 175. Let's now go to, let's come home. Where's South Africa? South Africa, we are down Johannesburg. Yep, South Africa, not. It will cost me 185. So you can see, I either go here, this guy at the top here, which would be way cheaper. I either go here and I begin to manage space. This is 140, or I come here and I pay more, but have better speed. Where's our South Africa again? 140 to 185. That's almost like $45 difference. But I have to, what's it called? Decide which one I go for and pay the price. So that's the idea behind your region. Then also, when you see availability options, here I can say availability zone. Physically separate your resources within an available region. So in this particular case, I have to specify to say, okay, this guy, I want this VM to be in a particular availability zone 1. So what this means is that this VM would be placed in zone 1, availability zone 1 of the South Africa North region. So if I'm creating another one, if I'm manually if I'm manually designing my availability sets, then if I'm creating the second one, I'll put it in maybe South Africa, maybe zone 2, or I put it in a different region entirely. Or better still, if I come here, so looking at availability zone, you can optionally specify an availability zone in which you deploy your VM. If you choose to do so, your managers and IP address will be created in that particular zone. And what are the availability options you have here? Offers you regions option for managing availability and resiliency. So you have to architect your solution if you want your VMs to be replicated to different regions, or probably use an availability set. So if I come here to see virtual machine skill set, and what does virtual machine skill set? It will distribute for me my VM across zones and fault domain. This would also distribute my VMs across multiple fault, domain. So here, I don't have any option here. No applicable set in the current region. So, okay, this gives me an instance of where I was talking about. You could have some services in some region and you don't have another region. For instance, this guy is saying this availability set for this virtual machine is not available in South Africa. So it says no applicable skill set in the current resource group and region. But if I change this guy to say East US, I also don't have. Let me check if I have, what about East US 2? I don't have, okay. I'll change this guy to say this. This is even saying the selected image is not, okay, it's gone. Come back here. US West, is it there? Okay. So it's not there. If I say I want to create this guy myself. Okay, so here this now allows me to create one myself automatically, where I can specify my virtual machine type, the amount I'm paying, almost the same thing as what we saw earlier. But in this particular case, I would come here to say, no, this is not what I wanted. Okay. Yeah. So this would automatically create one for me and has given it a name because I don't have one existing. It automatically creates one for me. And what your skill set is for you to create more than one virtual machine at the same time and distribute it across different regions. I can specify my region, I can specify my availability zone and the likes. So that's that. Now, another factor you could use for pricing, which would talk more later when it comes to you managing prices, what referred to as a spot discount. Now, the way that works is currently this guy is priced at $140.16, which means I'm paying for it at the fixed price. But there are situations where you would have excess resource. Someone else has paid for this particular VM within a region. Let's say about 10 or 50 people have paid for this particular type of VM within a particular region. But over time, the usage pattern of those users shows that they are underutilizing it for a certain period. So maybe in the morning, there's no large traffic that would make them consume the resources of this VM to the fullest. So let's say maybe the VM comes with this guy comes with 4 CPU, and over time we've seen that they all average 10 VMs of the same type in this region average at, let's say, 2 vCPU. So which means you have excess of 2 vCPU. They can say would sell that excess resource to you at a lesser price. But if at any point in time, any of them choose to increase the use up to the fullest, will knock you out. That is what spot is. So this is the current spot configuration price. It's way cheaper. We can see this is doing even less than $1 per hour compared to if you are doing this per month. If you do this per month and see the price is way more than this guy. But what will be your eviction type? What is the eviction type? It's saying that if at any point in time they choose to begin to use their resources to the fullest, what do? We stop your VM or we deallocate it. Deallocate would mean the VM would still remain and you'll be able to bring it up much later. We'll stop it. Naturally, I guess this should, what's it called? Delete. That also takes us, so let me create this, then we'll come back to talking about stopping a VM and also deallocating a VM. So I'll go ahead I won't use the spots. I'll go ahead and use the standard pricing. I would go next and say, so this guy already has a resource group, that's a zone, blah, blah. I would go next. Here I can specify other resources. Now, these are underlying resources that this VM would use. I can choose to manage them or manage how they are created myself. Like come here to say, I want to specify what will be the disk size or what will be the information about those disks, or better still, then also networking. I could come here to talk about that, manage that. If I don't create one network, it's going to create one for me. Set what number of interface adapters that guy would have. You can say I have a default network subnet. We'll talk about what's it called subnetting in that context. If I want to place it behind the load balancer, I'll do that.
Hello?
Or I can as well just go, yeah.
Sorry, it's me again. Please, can you just give instances of where the spot instance can be used?
So you could use spot instances when most times when you are setting up let's say a bunch of servers for a particular purpose. Most times when you are doing high-end computing jobs that requires parallel services running together. So let's take, for instance, I need to do crypto mining. I need to do encryption, what's it called? The encryption or probably encryption, some kind of cryptographic test that requires me running several servers in parallel. At that point in time, if I need, say, maybe compute from up to 10 servers, it will cost me more, even though I don't need them for a long time. I just need them as they are available. It will cost me more for me to go and use servers that have fixed prices. But I can save more if I choose to go for spot. If I go to choose to go for spot, let's assume I could do, if I need 10 servers, I could do 2 that are servers that I pay fully for, and I do 8 that are spot. That 8 would have their compute resources complementing that 2 that I'm actually paying for without stopping my service. So when the resources for the 8 spot is available, my job, maybe I'm doing some kind of batch processing, the job is faster because I have more compute available and I pay less for the power of 10, for the power of 8 additional compute. And when they are not available, my job still runs, it doesn't stop. I just pay the fixed amount that I need to pay without paying for the additional 8. So you would always use it most times when you need extra compute resources at random without committing to a particular VM running all the time. Or maybe you need something for a demo, a POC, a short time demo or POC. You could quickly do that as well. And you use it. Once you are done, you release it.
Okay. Follow-up question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So concerning the stop or the allocate, what factors might drive that action?
So if you say stop, it stops your VM and your VM gets automatically deleted.
Yes, I get you. But what could cause that? Is it that when they notice that the servers are not being used as?
Okay. So your what's the name of that term? Let me come back. There's a term used for it. That is what will be what do you want to happen when the spot compute is no more available? That is where that option comes in. So I'm saying that let me come back here. So eviction policy, that's the name. Using the instance I gave earlier, you have 10 guys that have paid, they are not currently using it, and you have 2 vCPU that is in excess, underutilized. So I'm saying, oh, I want to go for spot, give me that 2 vCPU. Then they are now asking you, we'll give it to you now. But when those guys who are using it now need to use it, what should happen to your own resource? So you are meant to choose yourself. Oh, when they come back to say they need their 2 vCPU, deallocate my VM. That means you stop it, you stop the compute, but every other component remains, my storage, my network, and stuff like that. Or you stop my VM, that means evict my VM and delete it. So it is what should happen when the owners of the resources now need it. That is what you specify there.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah. So this, I'll just go ahead. We'll talk about this. We'll talk about networking, scaling. So this guy is a skill set. If you remember, I specified the option of skill set, and I'm asking that, okay, now it's asking here that what should be the initial number of virtual machines that I should create. Let me see if it accepts one, because I don't want to spend. Well, naturally, you could do 2. When you do 2, you place them in different ability zones or probably in different regions. And you can specify what will be the rule to automatically scale. The instances when you do this is naturally most times for web applications for which service utilization would fluctuate. Let's take, for instance, say a Conga or probably a Jumia under normal usage. Performance user experience is fine with 2 VM. But when creating their VM, their web servers, they should create it as a skill set and not specify a rule that will decide where the number of VM should automatically increase. So maybe when the number of traffic goes beyond 1,000 people in a day, automatically increase my skill set by 1 so that user experience is managed. The traffic doesn't go to just 2 VMs alone. It's now spread across several VMs. Remember, we talked about availability, redundancy, and resiliency in the last session, where we said when you're driving or probably aiming for availability, you have virtual machines scaled horizontally so that they all share traffic. So I'll just go ahead and say create this guy. So this guy will be created in a resource group. And what I want us to download this guy, what I want us to note here would be the number of components that will be created. Even though what I've requested for is a VM, naturally it should create 1 VM for me, but we'll see what are the number of underlying components. Just go and create this guy. That will be created. So we'll come back to that when it's done. So let's go back to the slide. That might take a few minutes to create.
Sorry, Raj.
So any question? Yeah.
I think there's a question in chat.
Yes. Yes, sir. What does function in resource mean? Okay. So I talked about serverless infrastructure, where you have a code that you want to run. But naturally, your code would actually run on something. For instance, if I create a PowerShell script to perform a particular action, PowerShell wouldn't just run on its own. It would need a PowerShell runtime. That PowerShell runtime will need maybe a server to be installed on. So if I give you a PowerShell script now to say run this PowerShell script, you can't run it in your hand. You can't run it in your head. You have to take that script, log into a computer system that has Windows on it, although you now have PowerShell supported on Linux, or install that PowerShell library on a Linux machine, put the code there and click on run, or maybe you call it from the command line. That is what you require to run that PowerShell script. So if you are doing serverless, what you have is a function. A function is just a program or probably a script that you need to run to perform a particular action. But you care less about the underlying requirements for that particular function or probably script to run. Then you go serverless. You just give them. So the serverless, they already have them supported for different kind of platform. Maybe it is .NET, maybe it is PowerShell, maybe it is Python or stuff like that. And you run it. And that code or that application that you want to run is actually the function. So you could create function and run them. And the function may be an input into some other infrastructures they have created within Azure, or probably even something else outside the environment. So let's see if this guy is done running. Where is that? Right. So okay, yeah, from here I could see this guy is done. You could see succeed here. So I can either go to the resource or probably go to the resource group. So let me go to the resource group. So you can see the resources here. I have 8 of them. I have 8. For that, just that VM that I created, I had 8 other resources created for me. Network security group, public IP address, virtual network interface, virtual machine skill set, virtual machine itself, disks, and SSH key. But now imagine if I had wanted to delete the VM, then this is the virtual machine. Maybe I clicked on the virtual machine and I just come here to say delete. This will delete it, but those other components would not be deleted. And we'll see that in a few seconds. So if I come here to say delete this guy, all it will ask me is, okay, do I want to delete these other guys? The other guys is asking me if I want to delete it. It's just this 3 disk interface, public IP address. If I say yes, I want to, and I understand, I would say go ahead and delete. Go. Okay, that guy is gone. So if I go back to the resource group, let's see what we have left. I would refresh this guy. So you can see I still have 1, 2, 3, 4. I still have these 4 guys. And each of these 4 guys would have cost implication when I don't delete them. So I may have forgotten because I've just, they said delete virtual machine and I've deleted them and I leave it. So over time, no matter how small, these guys may be incurring cost of 0.001 cents, maybe per hour, or probably per minute, or probably per month, per day. Then someday they aggregate that cost that it becomes something significant. Maybe if you have your card there, charges you. If you don't have card there, it sends you a bill to say you have incurred so what's it called, cost. And I'll be like, no, but what I did, I deleted it. So you didn't delete it, you only deleted specific component. So the point of what's it called? The point here is that to manage the life cycle of your resources, put them all together in one resource group. And when you want to delete them, as long as you don't need them all together, you delete them at the resource group level. And at the resource group here, it's only has to type confirmation of the resource group name. Then I'll say delete. So it's going to delete that resource group and every of these components that are in it as well. So let's move on. So now that is yeah.
Do you have time for a quick question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just confirm. Looking at it hierarchically, it's the subscription first before the resource group, right?
Yes, your subscription first before your resource group. But at the top, on top of subscription, you'd also have management group. So let me, I didn't include that. Let's come back to, let me go back to my portal. And let's see, management group. By default, there's a management group created for you. Your management group can contain more than one subscription.
Yeah, about that, you were alluding to an organizational kind of function where you can have maybe a subscription group for finance, like different departments, depending on what you're doing for them.
Yeah. So there's a default management group, which is tied to root management group. Use management group to group subscription. Then after grouping your subscription, apply policies to it, where your policy defines what are those things you want to be able to do. Presently, I have just one subscription here, and that subscription is already tied here. But let me see if I'm allowed to create another management group and also define a policy to it. Call this policy, call this test management group. Now say submit. So at the top of the hierarchy, what you have is the management group. After management group, then you have subscription. Below subscription, you have resource groups. Below resource group, then you have resources itself. So I'm going to refresh this. Okay, so I have my test management group here. Inside my test management group, I can begin to add whatever subscriptions that I want. So if I have more than one subscription, I can put it here. If you are using, so let's look at this scenario. Let's assume our model for managing subscription is using department. So I have the finance subscription, I have the engineering subscription, I have the sales subscription. So if there's a job request to say we want so service, or probably are working on a particular project that requires Azure services, we know that when we are creating it for finance, we tie it to their subscription. But at the much higher level, maybe at the governance level or probably compliance level, there are compliance requirements. Governance and compliance are said by virtue of the NDPR system run in Nigeria. User data and transactional data are not allowed to be processed in Russia, in South Africa, and in China. So which means any of your data processing requirements, none of your data processing requirements should be done. And when they say data processing requirements, they are saying either you are storing data or probably you are using services, irrespective of the type of services in that particular region, maybe either in Azure or probably elsewhere. But Azure has said that, okay, now if you have such requirements within your environment, we have a way to help you manage it on our platform. All you need to do is to go and create a policy. And presently, I don't have any policy. Yeah, I can come here. This guys, the scope of my policy is this. Policy definitions. Let me come here. If I have any default, I can pick up here. So yeah, so like here, I can say it says audit virtual machines without disaster recovery configured. This even for security. So it's saying that if you create any virtual machine and they don't enable disaster recovery on it, either maybe it's in a virtual machine skill set or maybe you enable virtual machine backup for it, flag it. That's a policy. I would add that here. I would go ahead and create. So what this means now is that if within this management group or every subscription tied to this management group, someone goes ahead to create a virtual machine and forgot to enable disaster recovery for it, it will flag it as non-compliant. And if you have your audit unit or private security unit also having some kind of view into this particular portal, they could pick it up and say, hey, you guys are forgotten to do this stuff. Go and do the needful. I could go ahead, check for another one that applies based on my requirement. Come here, but there are a whole lot of them. So let me come here again. What else? Okay, let me search for GDPR. GDPR. Let me search for EPA.
Are you just tied to the policies on here, or you can customize?
You can create custom policies. You have the options to create custom policies. Let me see, built-in. But if I don't have any custom policy here, so I'll just come here and so there are a lot of these guys here. Just you pick whichever. So I'll say compute. Something. So compute here. Configure machine disable local. Okay, yeah, this is also another good one. Security. Configure virtual machine compute to disable local authentication method. You disable the local admin account on that particular machine, which is always a standard security requirement. So you can do that and put them all here and enable. So for each of them, each of the policy tied to this, you could always have this level of maybe compliance, exemption, and stuff like that. So if you want to create custom policies yourself, then you could come here and do custom policy authoring. But when you are doing custom policy authoring, it would always be you picking up one existing policy here and trying to modify it to speak to exactly what you want it to do. So it is tied to the management group. The management group, we have within it the subscription. So if I have the subscription here for finance, the subscription here for engineering, and it's because I have just one subscription, and your subscription cannot be in more than one group at a time. So this guy is already in the default management group. If I go ahead to pick it, it's going to move it to this management group. So that's the idea behind the management group. And when it comes to management group also, you could also, I also said each of them are also level for which you can manage access control. I can define who has access to this management group itself. Who can view access or probably perform actions within this management group. And you have a lot of rules that you can assign. Presently, this guy is a owner and this guy is a security admin. And what are the available rules that I can assign? You have a whole lot of them. So this guy works on the role-based access control, where you specify what is specific role that the person wants to play in this particular regard and give them the required permission. I can do that at the management group level. I can do that at the subscription group level. Also, you could also assign, let me come back here. My own subscription group is here. I come to this guy and I come to this guy. So you can see access control here also. You could also manage who has access to this subscription. And also at the resource level, if I come to resource groups, I can come to resource group as well. This resource group, I can come here also and define who has access to this resource group. There's this other part, although this is not for security, where you can do resource group lock. You could also do it at subscription level. You can either lock a group or probably lock a subscription. And the two types of lock you have is read-only or probably delete. This is not a security feature per se. It is only used in, for instance, delete. Someone doesn't just go and mistakenly delete a resource group. So when maybe you are moving your mouse around and you just go and say delete, it doesn't go ahead and perform that action. It will tell you don't have the right to do it. So you have to go and remove the lock. Or maybe read-only. Someone doesn't just go ahead and modify something. So if it's read-only, I place the lock on it. Even when you go ahead and mistakenly click on something that is meant to be a configuration change, it doesn't, take action because it's read-only. So that's that for that. Going back to the slide. So now, we've seen resources, resource group, we've seen management groups and the likes. Now, each of these within Active Directory, when we spoke about identity management the last time, we said one of the primary functions of identity management is for it to be able to complete, for it to do authentication, authorization.
Raj, we can't see, I can't see your slide.
Oh, sorry, still showing the whole slide. So one of the primary functions of identity management is for you to tie. Who does what? So I have a system where you have resources and you have so many people accessing that resources. You want to be able to tie who a person is and what resources they are able to access within that environment. And within the legacy system, we're talking about Active Directory or Active Directory domain services, which you bring up by spinning up your virtual machine, installing Active Directory domain services, and you do the likes. Within Active Directory, there's also one of the underlying infrastructure component of Azure generally is identity, and that identity is Azure Active Directory. By default, when you spin up any Azure tenant, by default, an Azure Active Directory is created because that is what it uses to manage identity within the Azure environment. Even if you need Active Directory or you don't need Active Directory, it will automatically create Azure Active Directory for you. So Azure Active Directory is actually a cloud identity management application, which is totally different from Active Directory as we know it. And primarily what it does is provide application management, authentication, device management, and hybrid identity. Its primary purpose is actually authentication, but could also use it within this environment to manage your application, authentication for other third-party applications. You could use to manage devices that need access to applications within that environment. And in the case where you need to combine your on-premise and cloud infrastructure within an hybrid architecture. The difference between both is that Active Directory, Windows Active Directory is on-prem. The mode of authentication using NTLM, network level, it should be network level management authentication. While this guy uses cloud-based authentication protocol like the secure access markup language, OAuth, OpenID, WS Federation, which are modern authentication model. Both of them manage making use of the users and group. They do authentication, authorization. Authentication is validate who you are. Authorization is validate what you have access to within that particular environment. So, however, beyond Azure Active Directory, just taking note of the name, Azure Active Directory. This is AAD, Azure Active Directory. There are different other models of Active Directory which you can use within the cloud. Now, Active Directory is Microsoft's proprietary name, and due to the success they've had with Active Directory domain services, every of their other identity management system has the word Active Directory in it. So when they say Azure Active Directory, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a direct replica of Active Directory as you know it. It just means that that is another identity management offering of Microsoft using that word Active Directory. So you have the Active Directory as we know it, which is the directory system for legacy system that you find in most organizations, and primarily it is used for providing authentication for network-based services, network-based resources. Just think of any network-based resources, HTTP, HTTPS, your Exchange on-prem, your printer or print services, your file server message block, all these network services, it provides authentication for them using LDAP to create the directory, NTLM operables to provide authentication using the ticket model of authentication. You could create groups, users, you could manage your directory using OUs and forests, and it has to be installed. You manage it yourself. You have to install it. Either you're installing it on the physical server or probably on the VM. Now, you have Azure Active Directory, which is a cloud-based identity management system that works using HTTP and HTTPS. So this makes it a web-based identity management system. And it is not a cloud version of Active Directory because they are two different things entirely. It is not a cloud version of Active Directory. It's a different product on its own. Then it provides authentication for web and cloud-based services using REST APIs. And the model of authentication is SAM and OAuth. There's no tree structure like you have within Active Directory, where you could have one OU being a parent to another OU. You could have several OU, you could have several domains and several forests. You don't have that. It's a flat structure. Then it works on the SaaS cloud model. That is software as a service. If you remember, software as a service, what you are consuming is just the service. So what you are consuming on Azure Active Directory is identity as a service. So sometimes Azure Active Directory is actually called IA, that is identity, IAD as a service. Somehow refer to that, identity as a service. And due to the fact that it's not a direct replica of AD, it lacks some of the features that you find on Active Directory. And these guys, their use cases or probably our targets are quite different. This guy is targeting cloud web-based services, while this guy is targeting legacy on-prem services. You could have them in hybrid. That's when you have hybrid Azure AD, where you sync objects from Active Directory to Azure AD as a means of maintaining the same set of identity for authentication. So that if I currently use Active Directory, I don't need to go and create another different account for my user in Azure AD. When I begin to adopt cloud, they will now have two accounts. No, I can do a sync of objects. I can sync user, I can sync computer, I can sync groups into Azure AD. And when they get to Azure AD, they adopt the Azure AD mode of authentication. They adopt SAML and open auth mode of authentication. They still don't use Kerberos. And when you are moving, when you are syncing, when it comes to devices, because your Active Directory supports authentication of devices, you could do any version of Windows, starting from, let's say, maybe Windows XP up to the latest version, Windows 11. But Active Directory, Azure Active Directory only supports devices starting from Windows 10, and it also supports mobile devices. Your on-premise Active Directory does not support mobile devices. That's why you can't join your Android phone or probably your iOS phone to AD, but they can join on Azure Active Directory. Then one additional service is Azure Active Directory Domain Services. Azure Active Directory Domain Services, which is different from Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory Domain Services is a managed Active Directory, a managed form of, let me clear this, a managed form of this. When you say managed, it means that the provider is taking responsibility for a certain part of the stack of that particular technology. So which means you'd have Active Directory in the cloud, but being managed by Microsoft. It still runs on domain controllers, but you don't have access to those domain controllers. You don't manage them. They manage them. It still supports NTLM and Kerberos like AD. You have OUs and group policy like AD, but you don't manage the domain controller that presents these services. It adopts the platform as a service model. This guy adopts the software as a service model. If you go to the cloud and set up a domain controller and install Active Directory Domain Services and make it a domain controller, you are adopting an infrastructure as a service model to present your domain controller. Is that clear? So you have a platform as a service, and this guy does not support, despite the fact that it's a managed form of Active Directory. It does not. There is no support for direct synchronization. So which means you can't synchronize your object on Active Directory to the managed Active Directory. The only synchronization part that is supported is from Azure Active Directory to your managed Active Directory. No synchronization with AD. But nevertheless, this managed AD also is not a complete replica of Active Directory, because a lot of features on the managed domain controller or managed domain services is not supported on a lot of features on Active Directory is not supported on the managed domain services. For instance, schema replication and schema extension. Within Active Directory here, if you have 10 domain controllers, they all replicate across each other. When you have managed domain controller here, the replication does not extend to this guy, just like syncing does not extend. You can't extend your schema. Schema extension is increasing the number of attributes that it have on objects within Active Directory as required by an application. A very good example of scenarios where you have a schema extension is when you are installing applications that integrate directly with Active Directory, like when you're installing Exchange, or maybe when you're installing Sky for Business, you'd have schema extension. This guy does not support schema extension. So, what scenarios would you use this? What scenarios would you use this? What scenarios would you use this? So there's no doubt what scenarios where you'd use the Active Directory. When you have all those your on-prem applications or services that makes use of NTLM and Kerberos, and they are on-prem, you use Active Directory. When you are working with cloud applications or applications that adopt modern authentication, you use Azure Active Directory. When you want to be able to combine both using one identity, you set up an hybrid. The hybrid is just a combination of this and this. And how do you set up an hybrid? You sync your object from on-premise to the cloud using the AD Connect tool. Then when do you use this? You use this when you have cloud-based application that still needs to use NTLM and Kerberos. Cloud-based application that still needs to use NTLM and Kerberos. Mind you, NTLM and Kerberos are legacy authentication system, and over time, they would go out of extension. But for it to offer support for legacy system that needs to work in the cloud, without you going to set up a VM in the cloud, then you could use manage Azure direct domain services. Those are the flavors of Active Directory that you could have in the cloud. So now, but here, the context of what we're looking at here is just the Azure Active Directory. So within Azure Active Directory, that's Azure AD. You still have objects.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
For the Active Directory, the cloud provider, that's like Microsoft and AWS, do they have specific ones that belongs to them, or they all use the same for the Active Directory?
Okay, that's a good question. So Active Directory is the property of Microsoft. It's their proprietary or private intellectual property. So when you have Active Directory anywhere, no, it's a Microsoft product. So looking at other providers outside of Microsoft, AWS, I know. AWS has its own identity management system or private identity management solution, which they call IAM, which is Microsoft's equivalent for Azure Active Directory, but it is not Azure Active Directory, and it has no Active Directory in its name. It is their own, and it's even completely different from Azure Active Directory. But just the way that within a cloud environment, there is a need for it to have an underlying identity management system. AWS has created their own cloud identity management system. Google also created their own cloud identity management system. Likewise, Oracle in the cloud. But due to the fact that within the market now, enterprise applications, let me say, this is not a factual statistic, but I can say close to 50% of enterprise applications runs on Microsoft Stack. And when you say Microsoft Stack, you are starting with the Windows Server operating system. On top of it, Azure AD as the identity management system. Due to that reason, and a lot of these cloud providers wants to support the availability of legacy systems on their own platform, so that the only cloud platform where people will run their legacy system would not be Azure. They don't want to limit that market to Microsoft alone. They created their own equivalent of managed domain services on their platform. For instance, you have managed Active Directory on AWS, where AWS will manage domain controllers for you. And it is still AD, it is still called AD, it is still called Active Directory, it's called Manage Active Directory. And also still on AWS, you can also go and spin up a VM and install Active Directory yourself. So it's either you go to, if you are using AWS, either you go spin up the VM, install Active Directory on it, or use their Manage Active Directory on that particular platform. Or better still, you come to the Microsoft platform and do the same. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes.
So that's the way it works. So you have an object. Your object will include your user, your computer, and your groups. An account is an identity, which is an object which you have data associated with it. That means you have a profile created for that particular identity of public object. You have an Azure AD account, which is tied to Azure AD or probably other Microsoft Cloud services. You have your tenant. Your tenant is what you create automatically when you sign up for a cloud account, and it is tied to your subscription for that particular service. And you have your subscription. We've talked about Azure subscription by default. A subscription is created by default for you when you sign up. You could create additional subscription. A tenant also, an AD, Azure AD tenant is also created for you by default when you sign up, but you could create more. I can have more than one Azure AD tenant tied to my subscription. So your Azure Active Directory is not free, although it comes with a lot of cloud services by default, but the package that comes differs depending on what is your level of subscription for that particular service. Even when you don't use Microsoft 365, like Microsoft 365 is just one of the most popular service that you use that comes with Azure Active Directory. So it's not a must you use Microsoft 365. And mind you, Microsoft 365 is entirely different from Azure as a platform. Microsoft 365 is a cloud platform for software as a service around collaboration tools, Exchange, OneDrive, Intune, you also have SharePoint. While Azure as a cloud platform encompasses several other cloud services, excluding those that I've mentioned for Microsoft 365. But what they share in common a large number of times is Azure Active Directory, because that is the identity engine that powers both ends. So when you sign up for Azure Active Directory or probably any other Azure service, you automatically get Azure Active Directory, which is free, supports 5,000 objects, which is a lot. It works for you as long as you don't require all these other add-ons. For your M365 apps, when you sign up for M365 Cloud Service, you have unlimited objects, you support single sign-on, and you have these other 3 services tied to it: identity access, B2B collaboration, identity and access for O365. If you need more than this, you could up your subscription into P1 that gives you this addition: premium features, hybrid identities, advanced group, conditional access, and the peak of it all is the P2 that gives you up to identity protection, governance, and conditional access. So, like we said, your object within Azure is primarily still users, groups, and devices. But how the devices integrate in Azure AD depends on a lot of factors. For instance, if a device is a cloud-only device and is directly joined to Azure, that device is flagged, is seen within the console as an Azure joined device. And the only type of devices that this can be would be mobile devices and Windows 10. Anything less than Windows 10 is not supported to be joined directly to Azure. Devices can be registered if the device is accessing one or more services within Azure even though it is not joined to Azure, then it will appear as registered. It's just a scenario where you have your bring your own device. For instance, I have my private computer system, and I install Outlook from M365 to access my email. It's going to show up that I'm using that computer system to access resources within Microsoft 365, and it will show up that device as a registered device. It could be Windows, it could be Android, it could be Mac, it could be every other type of device. It could even be any OS, or what's it called, starting from Windows 10 Plus or probably Mac OS or thereabouts. Then you have hybrid. Hybrid is when you are doing hybrid, naturally, you are integrating your on-premise Active Directory with your Azure Active Directory. Then you have the devices being synced from on-premise Active Directory to your Azure Active Directory. This will start from Windows 7 Plus devices upwards, and you could still continue to use your group policy to manage those devices. Here, you'll be using configuration profiles to manage those devices. Here also, you could use configuration profiles and compliance policies also to manage those devices, especially when you are using an MDM like Intune for those devices. So on your Azure Active Directory, you'd see devices with different tags. You see some tagged as registered. You see some tagged as ADJ, Azure ADJ, while you see some tagged as hybrid. So this gives you a concept or probably an idea of what category they may belong. Another thing that is possible with Azure Active Directory is the ability to enable self-service password reset, which is something that is not possible on Azure AD. Users can't do self-service, except maybe they do if it's a device that is joined to the domain, they do Control-Alt-Delete on their domain joined devices. They can change their password, but outside that, is not possible. But Azure Active Directory allows you to do self-password, self-service, password self-service. That means users can always initiate password reset themselves. And this is always integrated with your multi-factor authentication. So let's look at users remains users. Guests are external users that you want to allow access to your resources within Azure AD. Your groups are still your groups, but there are different types of groups. They could be M365 groups, they could be security groups. They could also be dynamic groups where the membership of those groups are not fixed. They are based on certain defined parameters. See that? You could also have your devices, where your devices can be your normal PC, they can be mobile devices. Then you also have administrative units. Administrative units may look similar to organizational units on your on-premise AD, but they are not the same, because your on-premise AD OU have primary two functions: delegation of access and structuring of your objects. Why administrative units here primarily is actually used for delegation of access, because your Azure AD runs a very flat structure, so no hierarchical structure like you have within the traditional AD. So bringing up my page, let's see some of this context. Okay. So yeah, I have Azure Active Directory. And this is the default directory created for me when I created my tenant. It is free. It is running under the Azure AD free. So you can see that I'm limited by what I can do. I can only use this for single sign-on, and I can use it to manage up to 500,000 objects. So here I have users. I can create users individually. If I come here, okay, this guy is still loading. So presently I have 3 users here. I can come here to say create new user. Then I give this guy a profile. Then it becomes an account. I give it information. It could be a standard user, and also it could as well be, we said as well, it supports guests where you have users from other entities are coming to access resources within your Azure environment. So I could invite users. This is just me providing the name and the email address. The user gets an invite, like in form of an email, and once they complete one or two things, it gives them an identity here, which is stamped as a guest. So here I can go ahead to create, fill up this information to get a user created. I can create one after the other. I can as well create in bulk, where I download an Excel sheet. If I say bulk create, it would allow me to download an Excel sheet, and that Excel sheet would come this, okay. That Excel sheet would, let me see if I can bring up that guy, would allow me fill those informations. And after filling those informations, I go back and upload that Excel sheet, and it creates the user for me. So most times this would always work when you have large number of user certificates at the same time, or probably even when you are setting up your Azure tenant for the first time, and you have bulk existing users that you need to create. Let me share this Excel sheet screen. Yes. Okay. So you can see your display name, the user principal name, the initial password. If you want to enable signing or probably block signing by default, you put it there. What will be the user's first name, last name, job title? So at the minimum, the most important or the required field for you to go ahead will be the display name, the user principal name, which can be the email address, the initial password, and if signing should be blocked, you're probably allowed. Once you fill this in, you upload it back on that same web page, and each of those users will be created for you automatically. So that works in an environment where you have so many users to create at the same time. I mean, back here. So you'd once you fill that up, you put it here, you upload it here, and you go to say submit. That creates the user automatically. Then apart from that, you have groups. Here I can have a new group. Your group can either be security group or probably Microsoft 365 group. Microsoft 365 group is actually a new concept that was introduced that integrates group memberships with features within the M365 environment, like email, Teams, and the likes. So when you create an M365 group, it creates a lot of other underlying resources that aids collaboration, like ability for you to be able to send email to those groups, and they see it as a separate what's it called, item or folder within Outlook. You have a SharePoint tied to it. You could have a Teams channel tied to it as well, and it would have its own email address. Or it can be the normal security group that we know, the security group. And why is group called? Any idea of why group is called security group within the Azure Active Directory environment? That's the legacy system. Any idea? When they say group is a secure, because within legacy system, you have distribution group and you have security group. What's the difference between distribution group and security group?
I think, good afternoon. I think the security group mainly is used to manage permissions.
Perfect. Yeah, that's correct. So it's called security group because it has an SID. And that SID allows you to assign rights, roles, permission to that particular group. Unlike distribution group that has no SID, all you can use to do is to broadcast email messages. So you have that same set of security groups here. and I can give that a name. Let me call this, let's say, Lagos, Lagos full access. Maybe I have a number of users that I want to grant permission to, and I just give them this name. I give them the description. Membership is assigned. I can begin to select who is going to be a member here. Another group can be a member, but I'll use a user here. So I'll go to say select and this guy. So I could do this, and your groups can also be dynamic groups. Just I don't think my level of my license type can allow that, but you can see you have membership type. Your membership type can either be dynamic or assigned. Would any of this allow me change? No. So my level of yeah, so I need a higher license for Azure Active Directory to be able to use dynamic group. So, but basically, what does dynamic group do? Dynamic group, you can see when I created this group, I specified who is going to be a member explicitly. So I went and selected that particular user and became a member. But if the option were to be dynamic group, I won't go and explicitly specify who will be a member. Instead, what I'll specify is rule for membership or probably criteria for membership. So what are those things I can use as a criteria for membership? Properties of a user or public computer system. Let's take, for instance, I can say if the office location of a user is Lagos, then it should be a member. So which means I don't need to go and begin to click on user to be a member. As long as that office location property of a user carries Lagos, the user becomes a member. If tomorrow I change the office property of that user to, let's say, become Abuja, the user ceases to be a member. So it helps you manage and clean up the content, the membership of that particular group without you doing all those heavy lifting of searching, removing, or probably adding, as long as that rule is intact. That is what dynamic membership would do. Then you also have devices. So we said we had talked about the different categories of devices that you could have here. Do I have any device here? Let me see. I doubt if I have any. Okay, yeah. So I don't have any device here, but if you have devices, you could have them listed here as well. Then other things you could have within Active Directory is you could use it to assign licenses to user, because you have a lot of applications or probably product or services within the Microsoft cloud ecosystem that requires use of license, like M365, Power BI, and the likes, Dynamics. You could also assign your licenses to each of them from this end. Then administrative units. So the idea behind administrative units is, let's assume I have a very large environment where I have employees in Lagos, employees in Port Harcourt, employees in Enugu, and in each of these office locations, I have an IT rep. I can begin to delegate the management of the objects of each of these users per location to their respective IT rep. So what I would now do is come here, I'll create an administrative unit. Let's assume I'll call this Lagos. I'll call this Lagos. I would go ahead and create. Now, this, I'll come back to this. The reason why I'll come back to this is that my license, because I'm running free Azure AD, it won't allow me. But this is you specifying what level of permission the delegated administrator would have over this administrative unit. Well, I'll just go ahead and create it first. So I have Lagos. After creating the administrative group, I would add members. What are the members I'll add? People that work in Lagos, that are currently in Lagos. So I have these two users that are users in Lagos. So then I have an administrator named, say maybe Tunji. Sorry, this is coming back here. I have an administrator named Chunji, and I want Chunji to be able to manage these users. The level of management will be defined by the role I give to Chunji. For instance, if I want Chunji to be able to reset their passwords without they having to contact maybe a super administrator in the headquarters, say maybe Abuja, then I would have to assign Chunji this permission. But I can't go ahead because I need a P1 or probably a P2 Azure license to be able to do administrative delegation on this guy. But that's what that works for. So what are the other stuffs you have within this? Let's talk about external identities. Now, external identities allows you to be able to collaborate with people outside your environment. So let's say you have partners, you have other organizations that you work with, that you share resources with, and you want them to be able to access resources within your own environment. Then the need for you to have external identities comes in. I have these three types of external identities that are possible within Azure AD. You have business-to-business collaboration, where you have partners authenticating with their own form of identity management system and use that to come and access resources within your environment. And this is where the creation of guests comes in. So you do this by creating them as guests. So that means if they currently use Gmail and the person has a Gmail account, I go and create a guest and put the person's Gmail email address there. The person gets invited as a guest, and I can begin to assign access. Maybe I want them to be able to access a particular folder. I want them to be able to join a particular Teams group. I want them to be able to access a particular application. I can do that. So you can do this to partners, vendors, suppliers, irrespective of what is their identity management system is. This is enabled by default. So you can actually create a guest within your environment and grant them access to whatever you want. That's B2B collaboration. Then you have the B2B direct connect. This is pretty much new. And what B2B direct connect works for is to allow you to be able to collaborate using shared teams, Microsoft Teams. There's a channel, it's actually not available now publicly, it's still under preview, called Shared Microsoft Teams, Shared Teams channel, where members of that particular channel can be members from different organizations. That means I could have somebody from organization A being a member of that particular channel. I have another person from organization B being a member of that particular channel without that person having a guest account in my environment. Without that person having a guest account in my environment, then I would enable B2B direct connect. This is not enabled by default, and even shared channels is still not currently available. If you check your Teams channel, you might not be able to create shared channel. It's still under preview. If you had signed up for what's it called, Microsoft Team Preview, it might be available within your tenant where you can test and see how it works. So you have somebody from this Azure AD tenant being a member of a particular Teams channel here, using their own identity. You don't have to create them as a guest here. Then you have the Azure AD B2C. For B2C, what you are having is you are creating a separate tenant. That tenant is called Azure AD B2C. And what is it used for? Well, if you're a developer, or probably you're an organization that develops custom applications, and you want external users, consumers, these business consumers, you want consumers to be able to use that particular application using any of the identity management, one of which is Azure AD that you have defined, then you'd create a B2C. So in this particular case, you'd have a different directory. I don't want to call it Azure directory as because it's different from your normal Azure AD directory. But you have a different directory where you can manage the users and the permissions they have. Unlike B2C, for B2B rather, if I create a guest, I'll still see that guest under my Azure AD. When I go to list of users, I'll see the user there as guest. But under B2C, I won't see them there. Instead, I would have a different directory for all consumers, partners, or probably clients that have been granted access to that my custom application using Azure AD B2C. This is also not enabled by default. You have to enable it if you need that particular service. It's a service you pay for separately. You pay for this separately. Why this one is already part of your Azure, what's it called? Your Azure AD subscription. So that let's see where you do this under your Azure AD before we go ahead and take up questions and see what activities we have for the week. Okay, I can see there are questions in the chat. I'll take them now, just a few seconds. So here you have this console from where you can enable or probably configure external identities. Even before this, if I come here to users, like we saw earlier, I can create a guest user where I'll have to put the email address of the user here, and I can grant permission to the user. I can grant permission to the user. I can make them member of a particular group. I can give them access to certain applications. This is actually under the B2B collaboration, which is enabled by default. For others, if I come here, let's see, each of these actually takes you to different setup identity providers. Identity providers are actually other identity management solutions that you want to be able to automatically authenticate, either maybe as guests. So what this means is that if you can see I have 3 here, Azure Active Directory, Microsoft accounts, email one-time password. If I have another partner that is using Azure Active Directory, if I add them here as an allowed identity provider, then when they come and access resource within my own Azure AD, I don't need to authenticate them again. I will trust whatever authentication any of these providers have done. By default, well, as expected, Microsoft account, Azure Active Directory. So if you use a Microsoft account, if you authenticated somewhere before, Azure AD does not authenticate you again. You just consume it. Then I can also add these two if I want. Due to the fact that they are common authentication engine that are trusted, I can say if you sign in using Google, if you sign in using Facebook, then I can trust the authentication done and grant you access as required. Then also you have your cross-tenant access settings where your this concern access setting, you can always have that done still under your B2B collaboration settings. And you can see some of those things that are allowed. Internal access settings, what are those things allowed? External access settings, what are those things allowed? You can see B2B is blocked here, and it's also, sorry, B2B Direct Connect is blocked, is also blocked here because you need to be able to use it with Microsoft Teams shared channel, and Microsoft Teams shared channel is not something that is currently available at the moment until when it becomes publicly available before you be able to use that. And there are several settings you can define to manage how guests or probably how external parties use your Active Directory. Like here, I can say guest user access. What are those restrictions? Guest user have limited access to property and membership. If I'm inviting, what should apply? Anyone in my organization can invite or probably can be invited. And collaboration restriction, here I have allow invitations to be sent to any domain, or probably I can deny, or probably I can restrict what are those domains. If I don't want people to invite as guests, any account that comes from yahoo.com, I can put yahoo.com here, or what's it called? I can specify what I want here and leave out yahoo.com. So which means if yahoo.com is not here, automatically you can't invite users using a yahoo.com email. So those are the additional identity services that you have within Active Directory. Any questions so far? Let me go ahead and see the question here in the chat. Okay, to the material, yes. So what is the difference between the cPanel mails and the Exchange mail servers? Okay, so here you have a question that says, what is the difference between cPanel mails and Exchange mail servers? Now, email service can be offered by any application. Exchange just seems to be one of the most common or probably most popular application for offering email service, but it can be offered by any application. It can even be designed, email system can be designed by a developer. So when you talk of Exchange, you are talking about Exchange that you install yourself, or Exchange that is tied to, say, a cloud service like a Microsoft 365, or maybe a GoDaddy, who is a third-party reseller of Microsoft 365 services. They offer M365 or probably Exchange email. Now, cPanel mails are mails that come, mail service that comes as an add-on package by default when you register a domain. So if I buy a domain, as part of the icing on top of the cake that the hosting service provider offers, they offer you an email service. Now, the technology that runs that email service is different, definitely not Exchange. It is something else, and it varies by provider to provider. It could be Profix, Postfix rather, which runs on Linux, and it could be any other technology. There are several technologies for driving email. So, but still yet, direct access to those services or to those infrastructures that runs the email, you don't have it, because at that particular layer, what you are paying for is a platform. They do the management. So all you do is go there, create mailbox and use. But that mailbox is not Exchange, because it is going to be expensive for them to use Exchange to run the underlying infrastructure for their email service. Exchange is used for an enterprise environment and they pay for it. So web hosting providers cannot use Exchange to run those add-on email service that they have, that they sell together with their domain names. So they offer you the cPanel is that interface where they allow you to do the management of your platform. Maybe I've paid for a Linux web hosting. From that cPanel, I can see my database. I can create database for my application. I can push my application to Apache. I can see the storage space that I have that I'm consuming. I can see the number of hits, limits, traffic limits, bandwidth limits that is tied to my web host in a particular month. I can do SSL. I can do majority of all those platform management from the cPanel. But the underlying infrastructure, the OS, the actual application, I don't have access to it. So that cPanel is the interface for management. So there are two different things and they are not the same. Exchange is just a technology for managing emails. cPanel mails are add-on services that is offered by cloud, by hosting providers as part of their domain selling services. As part of their domain selling services. I hope that answers your question. Hello? Any other question? Can we all hear me?
Yes, I think we can move on.
Okay. So that is how far we would go today. If you have questions, else let me show us some of the activities that we'll be doing today. I would send in the details of those activities.
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, so 1 minute. I think the person that asked the previous question just dropped another question that which is better between the two. That's talking about the cPanel mails and exchange server mails. Yes.
Okay. So when you say which is better, now when it comes to the choice of making choices in maybe architecting solution or probably implementing solution, a large number of factors what's it called comes to play. So it depends on the large number of factors. For instance, if primarily what I need is to host a website where I need just a domain, primarily I need just a domain to have my website running. And email is an add-on, is a nice to have. Those email services that comes with your domain name registration, they come for free sometimes. They work perfectly. You can, although they use legacy protocols, POP3 IMAP, they can work on your Outlook. They give you a web-based platform through which you can access your email. They may not be, friendly. The UI UX interface may not be friendly, but you can send email, you can receive email, you can read email. You can have it on your mobile phone using mobile app. You are good to go. But no advanced email management, let me use that word, email management feature is possible. Some of them try as much as possible to come with light spam management application that can help you with spam management. Maybe some of them could come with, at least for you to have email rules, move emails from one place to the other. Some of them will come with folders, as in like that. So they work perfectly well and they are fine. But if your primary focus is to have an email system, you know, the first one I said the primary focus is for me to have a website or probably a domain. The focus of the requirements is not email. When the focus is email, then it becomes a big deal, it becomes a different thing entirely. If the focus is for me to have an email system, then I'll now begin to look at what are the possible features I'm willing to have. Even within the, number one, if I say exchange, then it means that I have an IT infrastructure on which I can install exchange at a minimum, depending on the number of users you have. Let's assume you are doing a one box, a one server exchange, considering the fact that all the different exchange roles have now been packed into just one server. You need a server with, let's say, maybe that's 2 gig RAM, a Windows Server operating system running on it, maybe a storage of, let's say, minimum of 500 gig, depending on the number of users you have and what will be the size of the mailbox. You need an email gateway for routing your email in and out. You need an SSL certificate. If you put that all together as a requirement in terms of cost, the cost may be justified because it is a requirement. I'm saying I need an email system, and this is the cost for me. Then you now begin to talk about maybe having an administrator to set it up for you or perhaps to manage it for you. Exchange email might not be something you just install and keep and say autopilot, and yeah, it can work extensively, but over time you begin to demand out of it, or probably begins to demand from you. Then you need someone to begin to manage it. Another option would be that, okay, let me go the cloud way. Even when you are going the cloud way, you have packages starting from the M365 standard up to the M365 E5. Between that standard and E5, you have up to maybe 6 or 7 other different plans, each of them coming with different features, different goodies that you can pay for. So there I can find my choice. Okay, I want just email, strictly email, exchange email that gives me all the bells and whistles of an exchange system. I can recall email, I can send email from the web, I can use Outlook, I can have a distribution list, I can do a lot of that, but I don't need Outlook. I can limit that to maybe standard where I don't have Outlook and I'll access it through the web. But as I begin to need more, I need to be able to manage email rules, I need to be able to do folders, I need to be able to do advanced threat protection, I'll be able to do spam management, then begin to increase towards the business premium or probably maybe the enterprise range. So your requirements would differ. So I wouldn't say which one is better. Which one is better would depend on what is the need of what's it called, the client, or probably whoever wants to use it. If the primary need of the person is email, they can go for Exchange Online. Or even some of these web service provider also provides premium email services that are not Exchange, apart from the one, because the one that comes to your web hosting cPanel is actually free. It's free to say, oh, basic requirements. Since you have a domain, yeah, you want to be able to have an email box tied to your domain, they will give you free. It's an add-on. But some of them sell a separate premium email service as part of service they render, which is even not Exchange. That's why on GoDaddy has premium email service that they offer that is not Exchange, and they have premium email service that they offer that is Exchange. So it's now left for you to choose. And that too is different from the free one that comes with the domain name that you register. So it all depends on what the users need, basically, to decide on which one is better for them. Any other question?
Sorry, sir, I just want to ask regarding this Active Directory for Azure that you've been talking about. I don't know if you could provide like a document that we can use for more further consultation.
Definitely.
Okay,
So
because like one of the reasons I've not been fully contributing because I'm new to it. Even though I understand how AD works, but you know, being in an Azure environment, I've never used that before. So it's more like a listening session for me.
Yeah, no problem. So I would, in addition to these tasks, I would share with a number of documentation links that would give you an overview of more or less like more better details into each of the concepts that were covered in this particular lesson. So for those of us that would like to read up more, which is actually quite good, to read up more into that those technologies and have better understanding of how they work and how they relate with other services. So if there are no questions, I have these tags. The details of each of those tags will be shared. I'll share them in the Discord channel. I want to believe we all have Azure tenants intact, the same Azure tenant. There you'd create a resource, manage the resource groups, and also delete the resource group at the end of the day. You create and configure an Azure AD user. For this, to create a dynamic membership, you could actually, so the only caveat to this, now on your free Azure tenant, you can't do dynamic membership, but you can create a trial Azure P1 or probably P2, what's it called, service. But the only caveat to that is that make sure, I guess the trial is 30 days. Make sure after creating it, make sure you delete all the users you create under that premium. And after 30 days, delete that particular premium service so that you don't get charged. I hope you understand that. So I'll give you steps also to that. Then you could also try to create an Azure Active Directory tenant. Like I said, by default, a tenant is created, an Azure Active Directory tenant is created for you when you sign up for an Azure subscription, irrespective of on which platform. Maybe you are doing Dynamics 365 trial, you are doing M365 trial, or probably you are doing Azure trial, because what they all have in common is that single identity management system, which is Azure AD. A default Azure tenant would always be created for you, but you could actually create additional Azure AD tenants if you require. Learn how to create that. Then also you see how to manage guest users within Azure. That would be our activities which I'll share across, in addition to other documentations that would find very useful. Any question, please? So if there are no questions, we'll call it a day. After the lesson, before the end of the day, I'll share the recording for the session for a number of us that may want to refer to it. And if we have questions come up at any other time, you will just post them in the Discord channel. for us to all see, learn, and also try to respond to. So let's enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank
very
you,
much.
sir.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
thanks. Thank you.